Hello, hello, and thanks for stopping by. This is Resident Evil 4 for the Nintendo Gamecube, and I'm playing this one on a bona fide Gamecube console, with the resolution upscaled using an Eon Mach 2 HDMI adapter. Resident Evil 4 was released by Capcom back in 2005, and it was only released for the Gamecube. It came out in January, and I distinctly remember this game selling consoles because at the time it was the only place you could play it, and the Resident Evil franchise was a big deal. As an exclusive, I remember there being complaints because there were other systems out there that were really good, and up until that point, the PlayStation was the only place you could play the majority of Resident Evil games, so to get one great game that you couldn't play didn't sit well with a lot of people. It took about a year, and then they released a port to the PlayStation 2, and since then, they've released this one on a crazy amount of systems. It's a top-tier game, and it has been for years. It's moved millions of copies, I think, and it should ship probably millions more. It's really fantastic. Now, before we go further, it's important to point out one thing visually with the game. You're going to notice that it sort of appears in widescreen. This version doesn't fit a widescreen TV. There are black bars at the top and the bottom of the screen. The game was released back in 2005. This was before HDMI, and before flat-screen TVs. Newer versions of the game remove these bars and they give you more real estate on screen, but the GameCube version? Nope, these black bands are permanent. You do get used to it pretty quick, but you do have to adjust. Here, you play the character of Leon Kennedy, who is one of the main characters of the Resident Evil 2 game. That was the first real blockbuster release for the franchise. Resident Evil 1 was certainly good and popular, but 2 really knocked it out of the park. The story here, however, it's differently focused compared to the earlier Resident Evil games. And I do remember this getting some criticism when it came out, because it was different than what people were expecting. Most of the games before this, or probably all of them actually, they dealt with Raccoon City, zombies, and the Umbrella Corporation. This game just doesn't have these elements as a focus. If you were a fan of the prior games, and there were a dozen of them, this game was a departure for sure. But as different as this one was compared to the earlier games, it does its things so well. I think it converted a lot of fans. I know I was in this category. I played all the prior Resident Evil titles a lot, so when I was looking for a continuation of the story, and I popped this game in, I didn't get it. But I got into this one pretty quick. It's that good. Now the plot is certainly far-fetched, and I'm not going to attempt to defend how ludicrous things are in this game, but there are two things that stand out poorly in this area that I have to talk about. First, you're tasked to enter a European town and rescue the president's daughter. She was kidnapped, somehow, and you're sent in to rescue her. I think that's a batshit premise. If the president's daughter was kidnapped, they wouldn't send one agent in to rescue her. They'd send in a squad, or an army, or platoon, whatever, but there just wouldn't be one person. This is the president's daughter. They could have used someone else's daughter in this case. I mean anyone else's daughter, and it would have been more believable. It also wouldn't initiate an international incident, I'm sure. There, I said it. Moving on. The second thing that stands out for me in this game as far-fetched is probably the architecture. The graphics are beautiful, and the backgrounds are expansive, and the settings are grandiose, but as a result, they become completely unbelievable to me after a while. If you show me an enormous castle and have me wander the halls for hours, after a while I'm going to start to wonder, how many billions of dollars would it actually cost to build this structure? And for all the crazy puzzles and door mechanisms that you have to trigger to get walls and doors to move, there's never much logical sense as to why somebody would actually want to do that, ever. In most cases, I find myself wondering if some of these mechanisms are even physically possible. There's lava in a basement at one point. You know, just like in the lava room you have in your basement, right? In this game, as awesome as it is, they just went a little too far in certain areas, and it just becomes so unrealistic it makes my mind wander. For such a great game, would this have been even more exciting if it was more realistic in these areas? How much better could it have been than it currently is? Also, speaking of the castle, with all the rooms that you traverse, I always find myself wondering about the functions of the various rooms. They have to have a purpose, right? You don't just build a room for no reason. Where are all the bathrooms? Where are the bedrooms? What are all these weirdly shaped rooms actually supposed to be used for? And you don't start out in a castle either, you start out in a village. And you make your way through many, many different settings that are so diverse, it almost gets confusing. If you were to look at the very last level of the game, the setting where you are, and then you consider the very first setting of the game where you started, there is a gigantic swing. But okay, it's a game. It needs to be exciting, and it is. And we're basically trying to get from point A to point B to rescue the president's daughter. Gotcha. Overall, the game is different from prior entries in the series in a few different ways that really work. First, you're not stuck in the middle of a city just trying to escape. You're actually inserting yourself into a town, a setting, to rescue someone. That's definitely different. It's not survival horror anymore, really. Next, we don't have the tank controls that defined many of the earlier games. Instead, you have a third-person over-the-shoulder view. I remember thinking it was really strange back when I played it for the first time, but this control really works. This third-person view was actually considered groundbreaking at the time, and other games would use this in the future. Think of Dead Space or Gears of War. It's actually kind of common now. You also have a merchant that you can buy weapons and get upgrades from. That's certainly something they didn't do in the earlier Resident Evil games. I don't know how this merchant actually gets around, because he shows up everywhere, but I like it. You can also upgrade your storage capacity, which is great. Now, without zombies in a game, you need some sort of an enemy to fight, right? Something good. Here, you get something that you could describe as a zombie-like enemy. It's just something that's fun to shoot, I guess. Here, we're dealing with a huge cult, and there are various levels of leadership, and we know this because you fight a ton of different bosses. And then there's this parasite that people are infected with. Sometimes you'll shoot a head off, and then this alien-like monster will pop out and you have to kill that person again. It feels random, and it's a great point, actually. When a head explodes, there's this instant excitement you get when you got such a good headshot. But then you're denied 2 seconds later when it spawns a new mutant head, and you have to kill them all over again. It's a lot of fun. This is certainly a linear experience, and is actually something I find works really well. I do love open-world games, of course, but the path you follow here makes it feel like you're really exploring and covering a ton of ground at the same time. I think there's an excitement to going through such a variety. The first time I felt this in any sort of a Resident Evil game, I think, was the remake of Resident Evil 1 for the Gamecube. I remember going down in a basement and thinking, wow, I'm pretty far down. And then there was like another tunnel, and I went down further, and then there was another tunnel, and then another one. It just kept going. This game kind of feels like it keeps going. You don't really do that much backtracking in this one as the game progresses. It just keeps you moving forward. There's a great variety of weapons you get to use in this game too, and it's a lot of fun, although there are definitely standouts. You definitely want a good pistol, you want a shotgun and a rifle. Honestly, you shouldn't be trying out every weapon that you come across, because they cost money and you want to use your funds to upgrade weapons. You can't hold all these guns anyway, so you're going to have to pick and choose. I like the Red 9 pistol, and the high-end shotgun and the semi-auto rifle. I avoid the submachine gun, buying the rocket launcher or the mine thrower, and any other handgun that shows up in the pile. You can't afford to carry them, you can't buy them all and upgrade them all by the end of the game. You just don't have enough money available to you. If you try, you're going to end up with a handful of mediocre weapons, as opposed to a few that are maxed out. The game has more action than the previous Resident Evil games. That's sort of where the focus is. Yes, there are some slightly scary events, I suppose, but this one definitely leans towards action as opposed to horror. There's just not a lot of frights in this one, but there's definitely excitement. You also get a bunch of cutscenes that further the story, and there's also a ton of terrible and laughable dialogue. So bad that in the most recent iterations, they cut out little bits of stupid. At the end of the game, the girl you rescued hits on you. Yep, they cut this one. Good. Also, you kind of hit on your handler at the end of the game as well, and you do a really terrible job of it. They cut this one too, thankfully. Luckily in this version, though, you can forward through the scenes if you want to, which I certainly do. Thank you for giving me that function. In some of the cutscenes, you're going to run into button-pressing events, where something happens in the story and you have to do a particular button combination. They're sometimes frustrating, but they're definitely doable. The game never hung me up for long periods of time on any one boss or any one scene, but it still gives a fair amount of challenge when you have it set to normal. When you beat the game, you get rewarded to play it over. You can get different costumes, or you can buy an unlimited rocket launcher, or another gun. It also unlocks 2 other game modes, the Mercenaries, and you can also play a side story for the character of Ada. Personally, I keep looping the main game. I have this game 3 or 4 different times, actually, on different systems. I'm pretty sure I can improve my completion speeds. This one for the GameCube, this particular run, it took me 22 hours to beat. The second time you go through, once you know where things are, it's certainly quicker. I have it also on the PlayStation 2, feels mostly the same, and there's also a Wii-specific version as well that has a different control schema. I'm playing the PS2 one right now. The Wii version, I'm probably going to get to that one eventually as well. Some people speak really highly of the way it handles, and I'm very curious to see how it is. Well, that's all I have today for Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube. If you like this type of video, please feel free to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. And thanks for stopping by. Hope to catch you on another video.